Before we begin tonight's story, let your breath settle. Find a quiet space, loosen your shoulders, and prepare to drift into a darker corner of wartime London. A place where fear walked silently in the blackout hours, and one man used the cover of darkness to unleash horrors beyond imagination. During the long winter nights of 1942, as the city trembled under the shadow of the Blitz, the streets of London belonged to more than sirens and falling bombs. Hidden beneath the hum of war, another terror moved quietly through the blackout. He was a Royal Air Force serviceman, handsome, charming, utterly unremarkable at first glance. His name was Gordon Frederick Cummins, but history would remember him by another name, one whispered with dread by detectives and civilians alike. The Blackout Killer, the Wartime Ripper, the creature who hunted women while the city itself was cloaked in darkness. Across 6 nights, Cummins murdered 4 women and attacked 2 others, leaving behind scenes of brutality so shocking that a veteran Metropolitan Police inspector would later call them the most savage of his entire career. And yet, even as bombs rained from the sky, it was this single man who made London's darkest hours feel even darker. Tonight, we step into that fragile moment in history, where fear took many shapes, and the greatest danger was not always above, but walking quietly beside you. If you enjoy journeys into the forgotten, the unsettling, and the untold, consider subscribing. Your support helps these stories find their place in the night. Chapter 1. Childhood. Before the darkness that would one day follow his name, there was a boy born in the quiet village of New Earswick, North Riding of Yorkshire. On the 18th February 1914, Gordon Frederick Cummins entered a world that seemed, at least on the surface, ordinary. He was the eldest of 4 children, born to John and Amelia Cummins. His father worked as a civil servant, overseeing a school for troubled boys, a disciplined environment shaped by order and consequence. His mother tended the home, keeping the family anchored as best she could. Gordon's early life did not hint at the violence that would later define him. Sent to private school in Llandovery, South Wales, he followed an education path his parents hoped would steady him. Yet contemporaneous accounts from Llandovery County Intermediate School described him as unremarkable academically. Teachers later recalled a boy more interested in socializing than in studying. Even so, at 16 he earned a chemistry qualification, one of the few achievements that suggested he had potential, if only faintly. In 1930, Cummins enrolled at Northampton College of Technology. He did not last long. On 1st November 1932, he walked away from his studies and into a life marked by restlessness. At 18, he moved to Newcastle for a brief job as an industrial chemist. 5 months later, he was dismissed. By August 1933, he was back in Northampton, working as a leather dresser, only to be dismissed again 13 months later for poor timekeeping. Temporary jobs followed, short bursts of effort followed by yet another collapse. Then, in October 1934, London called. Here, in the capital's restless heartbeat, Cummins found a city where reinvention was not only possible, but expected. He took work in a garment factory as a leather cutter, earning £3 a week. Within months, he was being trained as a foreman. And yet, beneath this upward trajectory, a different persona was beginning to take shape. Cummins became obsessed with the idea of living as an aristocrat. He frequented West End hotels and clubs, spinning elaborate tales that he was the illegitimate son of a nobleman who paid him a private allowance. He trained his voice into an Oxford accent and insisted on being addressed as Sir Gordon Cummins. To maintain this facade, he stole, embezzled, and boasted to co-workers about his sexual adventures with local women. But the glamour he chased was thin, fragile. His employers soon noticed his lifestyle bleeding into his work, and on the 8th February 1935, he was dismissed once more. Afterward, he moved into his brother's flat in Queen's Mews, Bayswater, where he began contemplating what he believed would be his next ascent, never knowing how far and how darkly his path would eventually fall. Chapter 2. The Royal Air Force. As 1935 opened, the path of Gordon Frederick Cummins took another unexpected turn. Restless, dissatisfied, and still clinging to his fantasies of status, he volunteered for the Royal Air Force. It was a decision that would reshape the next years of his life, though not in the heroic way he imagined. He enlisted at the RAF's Aircrew Reception Centre in Regent's Park, London, where both seasoned servicemen and new recruits were assessed for training. Cummins began as a fitter, working on aircraft flight inspections. He showed ambition, his superiors noted it, but his boasting and elaborate claims of aristocratic lineage once again alienated those around him. The other airmen mocked him with a new nickname, the Duke. In May 1936, at an Empire Air Day event in the village of Henlow, Cummins met Marjorie Stevens, a West End theatre secretary. She was polite, warm, and, unlike Cummins, grounded. After 7 months of courtship, the two married at the Paddington Register Office on the 28th of December. The marriage would never produce children, nor the stability either of them quietly hoped for. Cummins' postings soon scattered him across Britain. First came the RAF Experimental Armament and Navy Base at Felixstowe, Suffolk. From 1936 to 1939, he followed the military research organisation north into Scotland. Then, on the 25th of October 1939, barely weeks after the outbreak of the Second World War, he was transferred again, this time to Helensburgh in Dunbartonshire. He remained there until April 1941, when he was reassigned to Killern, Wiltshire. By then, he had reached the lowest non-commissioned rank of leading aircraftman. It was not enough for him. Cummins longed to be a Spitfire pilot, a hero in the sky, admired, feared, remembered. But the RAF saw him differently, competent enough to serve, but lacking the discipline and steadiness required for the cockpit. On the 10th of November 1941, he was moved once more, this time to Cornwall. His arrogance travelled with him. Here, the men of his unit branded him with another title, the Count. In Falmouth, Cummins spent evenings at the Blue Peter Club, where he helped behind the bar and offered drinks freely to fellow airmen. The generosity was not his to give. It cost him his position behind the counter within weeks. Shortly after, the landlady discovered that jewellery worth about £35 had vanished from her apartment. She suspected Cummins. So did the police. But suspicion, without evidence, slipped through their fingers, and Cummins walked away untouched. By January of the following year, he had accumulated more than 1,000 flying hours, enough to present himself before the RAF Selection Board for aircrew examinations. To the surprise of many, he performed well. His record was clean, his military experience sufficient, and once again, he wrapped himself in the persona he had perfected: confident, polished, eager. As a result,
He was transferred back to the Aircrew Reception Centre at Regent's Park to be stationed among 300 other candidates. He was ordered to report for duty at 10 a.m. on 2nd of February 1942. He arrived believing his ascent was finally beginning. History would remember it as the moment the darkness truly began. Chapter 3. When the darkness became his shield. London in the autumn of 1941 was a city caught between exhaustion and resolve. 2 years had passed since the government imposed wartime blackout regulations in September 1939, measures meant to shield the capital from enemy bombers. Every night, the city disappeared into a hush of regulated darkness. No street lamps, no glowing windows, no illuminated signs. Even the beams of cars were smothered behind slitted covers. And within this enforced night, where shapes dissolved and footsteps went unseen, danger could move invisibly. It was within this shadowed London that investigators would later suspect Gordon Frederick Cummins first began to kill. The earliest suspected victim was Maple Churchyard, a 19-year-old secretary known to keep company with servicemen. On the evening of the 13th of October 1941, she vanished into the blackout, as thousands did each night, some heading home, others toward shelters, others simply trying to navigate the gloom. The next morning, workers discovered her nude body inside a bomb-damaged house on Hampstead Road. She had been strangled with her own underwear. The pathologist noted bruising patterns that suggested a left-handed killer, someone whose dominant strength lay in the left hand. Her handbag had been emptied, and several personal items were missing. Yet, unusually, Maple had not been sexually assaulted. Her time of death was estimated at around 9:15 p.m. Just 4 days later, on the 17th of October, another woman was attacked, 48-year-old widow Edith Eleanora Humphreys. She was found in her own bed at her Regent's Park home, her front door left ajar. The brutality shocked even seasoned investigators. Humphreys had been beaten severely about the face and head, then strangled, and finally had her throat cut. A single stab wound had penetrated her skull and entered her brain. Though alive when discovered, she succumbed shortly after reaching the hospital. Jewelry had been stolen, yet again, there were no signs of forced entry. The pattern, sudden attacks, escalating violence, theft, and strikes carried out under the shroud of blackout conditions would become disturbingly familiar in the months ahead. At the time of these 2 suspected murders, Cummins was stationed with the Royal Air Force at Cologne, yet his leave habits were well known. Whenever granted time away, he travelled to London and stayed at an address in nearby St John's Wood, placing him squarely within reach of both crime scenes. In a city where darkness reigned by law and fear travelled freely, investigators would later look back on these nights of October 1941 as the first tremors in a storm that had not yet begun. The blackout that protected London from bombers had also created corridors of perfect anonymity, streets where a predator could disappear as easily as a passing shadow. And in those long, unlit nights, someone had started to kill. Chapter 4. The Montagu Place Killing. A birthday that ended in silence. Night had settled heavily over London on Sunday, 8th February 1942. One of those wartime evenings when the city seemed to fold into itself, swallowed by the strict rhythms of blackout. Street lamps were darkened, windows shuttered, and the only sound that drifted through Marylebone's narrow streets was the wind pushing against sandbags and boarded doors. It was into this muted world that leading aircraftman Gordon Frederick Cummins stepped as he left his RAF quarters in St John's Wood, telling his wife he planned to have a night out in the West End. It was just after 6:30 p.m. By morning, the first body of what would become London's most unsettling 6-day killing spree was discovered. At dawn on 9th February, electrician Harold Batchelor descended into a street-level air raid shelter on Montagu Place. The shelter was meant to protect civilians from the falling bombs of the Luftwaffe. Instead, it had become a silent tomb. There, lying on the cold concrete, was the body of 41-year-old pharmacist Evelyn Margaret Hamilton. Her clothing was disturbed. Her scarf had been wound tightly around her head. Dust and broken plaster was scattered across the floor, clear signs of a violent struggle. Investigators later noted the position of her body, her skirt forced up, her undergarments pulled below her knees, and her right breast exposed. Yet again, as with earlier suspected victims, she had not been sexually assaulted. This too would become a grim signature. Her handbag, containing roughly £80, had been stolen, though several personal effects were left strewn outside the shelter. The empty bag was later recovered on Wyndham Street, with no fingerprints on any item. Hamilton's story in the hours before her death revealed a woman caught between endings and beginnings. Just 1 day earlier, she had resigned from her struggling pharmacy in Hornchurch. War rationing and shortages had ravaged many small businesses, and Hamilton had secured a new opportunity in Grimsby. She planned to leave London the following morning. At 6:40 p.m. on 8 February, she told Mrs. Maud Yoxall of her intent to depart the city. Hours later, just before midnight, a waitress at Maison Lyons Corner House near Marble Arch saw her again. Hamilton sat alone, quietly drinking a glass of white wine to mark her 41st birthday. It was the last time anyone saw her alive. A post-mortem revealed she had been strangled by hand. The pathologist noted the killer was left-handed, matching the same disturbing detail found in earlier, unofficially linked murders. Small cuts and abrasions marked her chest, and a 1-inch gash crossed her left eyebrow. But again, there were no signs of mutilation. Somewhere in the early morning darkness, as she walked back toward her lodging, the blackout swallowed her completely. In that silence, a predator moved unseen. London had grown accustomed to the dangers in the sky,
But now, hidden beneath its enforced darkness, a new terror had awakened on the ground. Chapter 5. The Butcher of Wardour Street. Morning came quietly to Soho on the 10th February 1942. The city was still wrapped in the lingering stillness of the blackout, a stillness that seemed to seep into its very stones. At just after 8:30 a.m., 2 electricity meter readers climbed the narrow staircase of 153 Wardour Street, expecting nothing more than another routine check. Instead, they stepped into one of the most brutal crime scenes London had witnessed during the war. Inside the small flat lay the naked and mutilated body of 34-year-old Evelyn Oakley, a woman known in the night streets of Soho by the name Nita Ward. She had been attacked sometime after midnight. The violence inflicted upon her was chilling in its deliberateness. She had been struck across the mouth and chest, then strangled into unconsciousness. Only then did the killer draw a 6-inch gash across her throat, severing her right carotid artery. Her head now hung over the edge of the bed, as if the life inside her had spilled entirely onto the floor that night. What followed, investigators would later note, occurred post-mortem. Her abdomen, genitals, and thighs had been mutilated extensively with a razor blade and a tin opener. 6 of the jagged wounds, clustered around the vaginal area, bore the unmistakable irregularity of a tool not meant for flesh, its serrated edge leaving a distinctive pattern. A flashlight had been used to violate her body. Close by lay a pair of blood-stained hair curlers, and to the left of her head, a razor blade slick with dried blood.
Her handbag's contents were scattered across the bedroom floor, but nothing of significant value had been taken. 7 unused Gillette razor blades were found neatly tucked inside a small bedside cabinet. The flat door had been closed, but not locked. No defensive wounds marked her hands or arms, suggesting she had been overpowered with shocking speed. The fingerprints left on the bloodied tin opener and a shard of broken mirror inside her handbag offered detectives their first clear trace of the killer. Chief Detective Frederick Cherrell examined the prints carefully. The pattern was unmistakable. The perpetrator was left-handed. Yet when the prints were run through the Metropolitan Police fingerprint registry, not a single match was found. Whoever had killed Evelyn Oatley had no existing criminal record. To understand how a woman like Evelyn crossed paths with such a predator, investigators retraced her final hours. She had once been married, and before the war, she worked as a nightclub performer. But as conflict deepened and London's economy constricted, she began supplementing her income through sex work under the alias Nita Ward. Soho, with its late-night neon and wandering servicemen, became her nightly terrain. On the evening before her death, 3 witnesses recalled seeing her outside a restaurant on Shaftesbury Avenue. It described her speaking with a young airman, clean-shaven except for a neat moustache, hazel hair, standing around 5 feet 7 inches tall. When she asked him about his sexual preferences, he replied with unsettling simplicity, "I like blondes." Hours later, at approximately 11:40 p.m., her neighbour, Ivy Poole, saw Evelyn ascending the stairs with this same man. Poole would later testify that shortly after midnight, she was startled awake by the sudden loud burst of Oatley's bedside radio. But the blackout had trained Londoners not to interfere with night noises. Curiosity was a luxury too dangerous in a city at war. Poole returned to sleep, unaware that in the room beside her, a nightmare was unfolding. In a city accustomed to bombs falling from the sky, another kind of terror had taken root. Quiet, intimate, and roaming the very streets where people sought comfort from the darkness overhead.
Chapter 6. The Night Visitor of Gosfield Street. The blackout still ruled London in February 1942. Every night, as the city dimmed itself into forced darkness, doorways and alleyways filled with silhouettes moving like shadows across a stage lit only by memory. It was in those narrow, darkened hours between late night and dawn that another life was claimed, this time on Gosfield Street. In the early hours of Wednesday, 11th of February, 43-year-old Margaret Florence Lowe, known in the streets by the alias Peggy Campbell, returned to her modest flat at 11 Gosfield Street, Marylebone. A neighbour, Florence Bartolini, saw her walking the hallway with a client at about 1:15 a.m. Moments later, Bartolini heard the man leave, the cheerful whistle of his tune drifting along the corridor before fading into the cold February air. No one knew then that Margaret would never walk those hallways again. Her body remained undiscovered for 2 days. Not until the afternoon of the 13th of February did the truth come to light, when her 15-year-old daughter, Barbara, arrived in London for her routine visit. A neighbour mentioned that Margaret hadn't been seen in 2 or 3 days, and that a package had been sitting untouched outside her door. Barbara knocked, then knocked again. There was no answer. Inside the bedroom, beneath blankets drawn neatly to just below her chin, lay Margaret Lowe. She had been placed on her back, legs spread, knees drawn upward. The violence inflicted upon her was far worse than what investigators had encountered in earlier killings. She had been savagely struck, then strangled with a silk stocking
still knotted tightly beneath the right side of her jaw. A faint foam still clung around her nose and lips. Yet it was the mutilation that followed, some inflicted while she was still alive, that chilled even the most seasoned investigators. When the eminent forensic pathologist Sir Bernard Spilsbury examined her body, he described the injuries as truly horrible, adding that the killer was a brutal sexual maniac, driven by a wicked lust to inflict the cruelest injuries upon the women he killed. Multiple tools had been used on her: a razor blade, a small paring knife, an eating knife, and a fire poker, all found either inserted into or lying beside her body. Her abdomen had been opened, exposing internal organs. On the right side of her groin was what Spilsbury called a deep, gaping wound, measuring 10 inches. A serrated bread knife protruded grotesquely from another wound near her thigh. A wax candle had been inserted 6 inches into her vagina. Even her uterus had been cut. The brutality was far beyond what had been inflicted upon Evelyn Oatley, yet the patterns, the left-handed violence, and the escalating sexual mutilation left Spilsbury convinced the same man had killed them both. Fingerprints, once again, offered the most promising lead. Investigators recovered clear prints from the base of a glass candlestick resting on the bedroom mantelpiece, as well as from a glass tumbler and a half-finished bottle of Hamerton's oatmeal stout. The print on the candlestick was identified as belonging to the killer's right hand, its angle and pressure confirming that he was almost certainly left-handed. The story of Margaret Lowe's life stood in stark contrast to the horror of her death. Born in Southend-on-Sea, she had become a widow in 1932. After selling the family's fancy goods business, she sent her daughter to boarding school and moved to London alone, working first as a cleaner. Later, adopting the pseudonym Peggy Campbell, she quietly entered sex work. Though her life had become difficult, she remained a devoted mother. Every 3 weeks, Barbara would travel from Southend to spend the weekend with her, mother and daughter visiting cinemas, cafes, and London's landmarks together. The war had driven many women into precarious choices, and the blackout made even familiar streets treacherous. Margaret was one of countless women navigating a darkened city where danger could slip through a door as silently as a draft. But this time, the danger had a face. It whistled as it walked away. And somewhere in the darkness of London, just hours after taking Margaret's life, the killer was already searching for another doorway to step through. Another woman to follow home. Chapter 7. The night Catherine Mulcahy fought back. In the dim, war-shadowed winter of London, on Thursday, 12th February 1942, the blackout wrapped Regent Street in a hush that felt older than the city itself. It was in this muted darkness that Catherine Mulcahy, a 25-year-old woman working under the alias Kathleen King, crossed paths with a man whose polite smile concealed something far more dangerous. Gordon Frederick Cummins, later known as the Blackout Ripper. Catherine had met countless men on countless nights, but this meeting seemed unremarkable at first. She agreed to accompany Cummins to her small flat on Southwark Street, a short taxi ride away. He paid her the agreed £2 up front, a gesture that felt almost overly proper. Inside the modest room, Catherine turned on the gas fire, letting a weak amber glow warm the shadows. She began to undress, though she kept her boots on, a habit formed from caution and instinct. When she glanced back, she noticed something unsettling. A strange smile spreading across Cummins's face, a smile that didn't belong to a man seeking company, but to something colder. As she lay back on the bed and motioned for him to come closer, Cummins moved suddenly. He climbed onto her, driving his knee into her abdomen, his hands tightening around her throat. The room shrank to the sound of her choking breaths. For a moment, the city's vast silence seemed to press in around them. London asleep, unaware. But Catherine fought. Her boots, still on her feet, became weapons. She kicked hard, striking his stomach again and again until his grip faltered. Cummins slipped, crashing to the floor beside the bed. Catherine seized her chance, bolting from the room and screaming for help as she fled toward her neighbour's door. Cummins followed, dishevelled, shirt half off, perhaps hoping to confuse the situation, perhaps trying to stop her from calling the police. He offered her 8 one-pound notes, muttering, "I'm sorry, I think I've had too much to drink tonight." But Catherine, trembling and furious, shouted that she believed he was a murderer. In his frantic escape, Cummins made a critical mistake. He left behind his RAF web belt, a detail that, in the days ahead, would help unmask him. On this night, in a city chilled by wartime fear, one woman's resistance cut through the darkness and altered the course of the hunt for a killer.
Chapter 8. The Last Night of Doris Jouannet. London, still sunk deep in the blackout winter of February 1942, moved under a silence that felt heavier after each new discovery of violence. Only hours after Catherine Mulcahy's narrow escape, the man she had fought off slipped quietly back into the shadows, searching for another victim. Before long, he found her. Doris Olga Jouannet, a 32-year-old woman who drifted between the roles of wife, hostess, and occasional street worker, doing what she could to supplement the modest income her aging husband earned. On the night of the 12th of February, Doris was last seen alive at 10:20 p.m., sitting in a corner of a small West End tea shop. She shared a glass of whiskey with a friend, Beatrice Lang, the amber light of the cafe lamps barely pushing back the darkness outside. Lang later said that Doris seemed relaxed, even cheerful. She mentioned she planned to visit a familiar client, someone she referred to affectionately as the Captain. When the two women parted on Oxford Street, neither could have imagined that those steps away into the blackout were her last. Not long after their farewell, Doris crossed paths with Gordon Cummins. However he approached her, whether through charm, confidence, or the misleading polish of his RAF uniform, she agreed to accompany him home. She led him to her ground-floor flat at 187 Sussex Gardens in Bayswater, a modest 2-room dwelling she shared with her husband, Henri. It was a place meant for rest, for warmth, for domestic life. But on this night, it became something else entirely. When Henri returned home, the hallway felt strangely still. He noticed their bedroom door was locked. It was unusual. Doris rarely locked anything inside their own flat. He called her name softly at first, then louder. No reply. Unease tightening his chest, Henri tried forcing the door open, but the old wood resisted him. Eventually, he stepped back and called the police. Before long, Constable William Payne arrived, urging Henri to remain in the corridor. Payne applied his shoulder against the door until it finally gave way with a splintering crack. Inside the room, the silence felt cold and deliberate. Payne switched on the light. There, lying diagonally across the bed, was Doris Jouannet. She was naked except for a black nightdress opened across her body.
Her left hand rested between her legs, as if frozen mid-gesture. Around her neck, a silk stocking, knotted tightly, cut deep into her skin. Payne stepped back into the hall, face pale, and said quietly to Henri, "I must advise you not to go in there." He returned to the Paddington police station to alert the Scotland Yard Criminal Investigation Department and the divisional surgeon. Soon, Detective Leonard Clare arrived at Sussex Gardens, entering the flat shortly after 8 p.m. The scene inside revealed a level of violence that echoed previous murders, yet seemed even more deliberate.
Doris's jaw had been broken before she was strangled. The knot in the stocking rested just beneath her left jawline, suggesting control, calculation. Then came the mutilations. Her abdomen, genitals, left breast, and thigh had been slashed with both a razor and a knife. One gash, a long 6-inch vertical cut, ran from her navel to her pubic region. Another wound, deeper and longer, tore into her genital area. The flesh beneath her left breast had been removed entirely. The knife used to mutilate her lay calmly on her thigh, as if placed there with a strange, eerie intention. 2 used condoms were found beside the bed. A gold watch and roughly £5 had been stolen. Items taken not for value, but as trophies. On the 14th of February, pathologist Sir Bernard Spilsbury conducted the post-mortem at the Paddington mortuary. Through the pattern of bleeding, he determined that Doris had been strangled to death first. Only then, after life had left her, did the killer begin his mutilations, most inflicted after death. Spilsbury noted that above the navel, the wounds showed restraint. Below it, especially around the genitals and thigh, there was a frenzy. Rage, obsession, compulsion. Whatever lived in Cummins erupted in that region. Doris had only participated occasionally in sex work since her marriage in 1935. Her husband, once a client, had become a partner who cared for her quietly and steadily. Money was always tight, and on nights when Henri stayed at the hotel he managed near Sloane Square, she sometimes returned to the streets for a few extra shillings. She told other women it was simply practical, nothing more. None of them knew danger was approaching so rapidly. Because of wartime paper shortages, news coverage of Cummins's murders remained limited at first. The war swallowed headlines. Civilian horror competed with global catastrophe. Still, whispers moved quickly through the West End's underground economy, spreading from doorway to doorway, pub to pub, room to room. Women grew wary. Many refused unfamiliar clients altogether. But on the 13th of February, the bodies of Mary Lowe and Doris Jouannet were discovered within hours of each other. Their wounds matched those of Evelyn Oatley, murdered just days before. The pattern was unmistakable now. The press found a name for him, a name that echoed through the blackout streets with rising fear. The Blackout Ripper. And launderers, already weary from war, realized it was harboring another kind of enemy. One that prowled not across continents, but across lamplit streets, leaving terror in rooms meant for sleep.
Chapter 9. The Woman Who Woke in the Dark. The Fail Assault on Margaret Heywood. Lycan, 13th February 1942. Night settled slowly over Piccadilly, that familiar mixture of glitter and shadow. The neon signs were dimmed by wartime restrictions, and the blackout curtains above the streets fluttered faintly in the winter wind. People moved through the darkness with practiced caution, accustomed to living in a city where danger fell from the sky. Few imagined it also walked the pavements beside them. It was on this February evening that Margaret Heywood, a young married woman, crossed paths with a man she believed to be just another serviceman on leave. She met Gordon Cummins in Piccadilly, where the two shared a drink and a simple sandwich in the warm glow of the London Trocadero. Everything seemed ordinary, civil, even pleasant, before they stepped back into the night and began walking toward Haymarket. But the tone changed. Margaret would later recall that he shifted suddenly, as though something behind his eyes hardened. Without warning, he pushed her into a narrow, dim passage off Piccadilly Circus, placing her in the kind of secluded corner the blackout made perilous. He touched her waist, pressing her toward him, urging her to join him in a shelter nearby. Margaret, uncomfortable, attempted to defuse the moment, allowing him a single kiss. She told him plainly she would not go anywhere alone with him. "I don't know any shelters around here," she said, "and I wouldn't go in with you anyway." The refusal changed him. Cummins became insistent, grasping, hands roaming as she shoved him away. When she turned to leave, he seized her by the throat. In the muffled alleyway, he forced her back, choking her as she fought to breathe. As her vision dimmed, she heard him mutter over and over, almost ritualistically, "You won't get away." Margaret lost consciousness. When she fell limp, Cummins knelt to rummage through her handbag, searching for valuables. And then, an interruption. Fate, arriving in the form of an 18-year-old delivery boy. John Shine, walking toward the nearby Captain's Cabin pub with crates of bottled drinks, paused when he saw a woman crumpled on the ground. His presence startled Cummins, who fled instantly, abandoning his gas mask and RAF-issued haversack at the doorway as he vanished into the dark streets. Shine rushed to Margaret. Moments later, she stirred, dazed, breath ragged, confused, but alive. He offered to take her to a hospital, but as they made their way up the street, they encountered Constable James Skinner, who recognized instantly that this was no ordinary assault. He escorted them both to the West End Central Police Station, where Margaret, shaken but conscious, gave her statement before being taken to a nearby hospital for treatment. Cummins, meanwhile, realized with horror what he had left behind. 2 items, clearly marked with his RAF service number. In a frantic attempt to cover his tracks, he slipped into a nearby pub, stole another airman's mask and bag, and hurried back to his base, hoping to create a false alibi. But it was already too late. At the station, John Shine handed over the abandoned gas mask and haversack. Detective Sergeant Thomas Shepherd opened the flap and discovered the number stamped clearly inside. 525987. He contacted the Royal Air Force Police immediately, who checked their records. Within minutes, the items were confirmed as government property issued to leading aircraftman Gordon Frederick Cummins. At 11:30 p.m., Detective Sergeant Shepherd received the final piece of information. Cummins was not at his barracks. He was absent, unaccounted for, and now deeply suspected. While he believed he had escaped into the night, the walls around him were already closing. Chapter 10. The night the mask slipped. The official arrest of Gordon Cummins. Dawn broke quietly on February 14th, the pale winter light filtering through a London still bruised by war and blackouts. Inside an interrogation room at Shepherd's Station, the air was cold, still, and heavy with a sense of inevitability. It was here, on this morning, that leading aircraftman Gordon Frederick Cummins, a man who had walked among the city's shadows, would finally be confronted. Detective Shepherd began the formal questioning, his tone calm but unyielding.
Cummins, pale and immaculately composed, protested at once. He insisted he was innocent. He claimed he had spent the entire evening drinking whiskey and bitter with a sergeant, whose name he conveniently could not recall, at the volunteer pub on Baker Street. From there, he said, the two of them had taken a taxi to Shaftesbury Avenue. He spoke of having a few stiff drinks at the bar, of chatting with a woman whose face he barely remembered because of how drunk he was. He claimed he only vaguely recalled walking with her down the street before realizing, sometime in the early hours, that he had violated curfew. So, he said, he immediately returned to base. About the assault on Mrs. Heywood, he professed near total amnesia. No memory of attacking her, no memory of violence of any kind. Yet strangely, he expressed regret and even offered to compensate her financially. When asked why the knuckles on his left hand were cut and bruised, Cummins responded smoothly. He had injured them while servicing an aircraft engine. Moments after completing this written statement, he was placed under arrest. The charge? Causing grievous bodily harm. The next day, on February 15th, officers examined the entries in the station's duty roster. It showed that Cummins had returned to quarters before 10:30 p.m. on each night corresponding to the murders and attempted murders attributed to the so-called Blackout Killer. But something immediately stood out. Many of these entries were written in pencil. They could be changed easily. Too easily. Investigators soon realized that Cummins' February entries were irregular. He always signed out when leaving, but frequently failed to sign in when returning. Interrogating his fellow airmen, detectives discovered that the men routinely covered for one another, vouching for late returns, adjusting entries, protecting their own. Detective Chief Inspector Edward Greenough went deeper. He learned that during the week leading up to his arrest, Cummins had been spending money freely, far beyond his means. And more tellingly, that Cummins and a fellow airman, Felix Sampson, had been slipping out through the fire escape after midnight on several of the key dates, returning only as dawn crept over London. When investigators searched Cummins' personal belongings, the facade collapsed entirely. Hidden away in a small kitchenette was a white metal cigarette case engraved with the initials L.W. It belonged to Evelyn Oakley. Inside the same concealed space was a photograph of Oakley's mother. Blood traces were found on one of Cummins' shirts and on the inside of his belt. Dust clinging to the cuffs of his uniform trousers revealed something unmistakable. A specific mixture of brick dust, identical to that found in the air raid shelter where Evelyn Hamilton's body had been discovered. The same type of mortar residue appeared inside Cummins' rucksack. Then came the most damning evidence of all. Detective Superintendent Frederick Cherrell, a fingerprint expert of national renown, compared Cummins' prints with those recovered from a tin opener and a shattered mirror found beside Evelyn Oakley's body. They matched. Additional prints found at two other murder scenes also belonged to him. There was more. 2 of the 10 £1 notes that the attacker had given to Catherine Mulcahy before and after assaulting her turned out to be newly issued. By tracing their serial numbers, Greenough discovered that the notes had been issued directly to Cummins on February 12th. Even so, investigators followed procedure. Both Heywood and Mulcahy were called in for an identification lineup. Mulcahy could not identify her attacker with certainty, but Heywood had no hesitation. She pointed to Cummins without faltering,
Still, Cummins clung to his story. He suggested that Heywood was mistaken and that another airman must have swapped gas masks and rucksacks with him, planting incriminating items to frame him. On February 16th, Greenough visited HM Prison Brixton, where Cummins was being held, to hear his account of the days from February 9th to 13th. Cummins denied ever meeting any of the murdered women and claimed he could not recognize their photographs. When presented with the personal belongings found among his possessions, he insisted they must have come from a gas mask case I picked up by mistake. He returned again and again to his story about swapped bags and switched equipment, an explanation Greenough found implausible at best. Finally, after listening to Cummins's repeated denials, Greenough told him plainly that he would be charged the next morning with the murders of Oatley, Lowe, and Jouannet. Cummins was remanded at Brixton to await trial. On February 20th, he was further charged with the assaults on Heywood and Mulcahy, and on March 27th, he appeared once more at Bow Street Magistrates' Court, this time formally charged with the murder of Evelyn Hamilton, the Blackout Killer's first known victim. London had lived months in fear of a phantom who hunted in the dark. Now, at last, the phantom had a face, a mask that had slipped, a name that could no longer hide in the shadows. Chapter 11. The Trial at Old Bailey, when the courtroom became a stage. Morning light crept across London on April 24th, 1942, pale and indifferent to the history that was about to unfold inside the great halls of the Old Bailey. Wartime London was a city accustomed to fear, blitz sirens, sudden darkness, whispered rumours in the blackout. But on this day, fear took the shape of a courtroom. Here, the man accused of terrorizing the city's nights, Gordon Frederick Cummins, would finally stand before the law. Cummins arrived composed, his RAF uniform immaculate, his expression unreadable. Before Justice Asquith, he entered a plea of not guilty. The clerk addressed the jury with solemn clarity. Gentlemen, the accused, Gordon Frederick Cummins, is charged with the murder of Evelyn Oatley on February 10th of this year. He has pleaded not guilty. It is your duty, after hearing the evidence, to determine whether he is guilty or not. Behind the formal language lingered a truth felt by everyone in the room. This was not merely a trial. It was London demanding answers. The prosecution team, Christmas Humphreys, KC, and G.B. McClure, KC, prepared to present a case built on forensic certainty and chilling detail. The defence, originally appointed, was Dennis Noel Pritt, KC, but fate intervened. On the first day, a legal technicality emerged regarding the presentation of crime scene photographs from the murder of Margaret Florence Lowe. The jury was discharged, and the trial was ordered to restart. 3 days later, on April 27th, a new jury took their seats. Cummins, unfazed, now represented by John Flowers, KC, and Victor Durand, KC. Throughout the proceedings, he appeared detached, occasionally smiling, leaning toward his lawyers with a light-hearted comment, or turning away from the witness stand to wave to his wife. She sat faithfully in the gallery, her belief in his innocence unwavering, as if her very presence could shield him from the damning testimony ahead. When the trial resumed, Humphreys rose to deliver the prosecution's opening statement. His voice was calm, but each sentence carved itself into the courtroom's silence. He described the discovery of Evelyn Oatley's body, the brutal injuries inflicted, and the weapons used to mutilate her. The prosecution would argue not by conjecture, but by science, fingerprints, timelines, and material evidence. "You will hear," Humphreys told the jury, "from one of the foremost fingerprint experts in this country. He will tell you that in 500,000 prints taken during his career, No two have ever matched. The prosecution asks that you determine, based solely on the evidence, that this man and no other murdered Mrs. Oakley on February 10th. The first witness called was Chief Inspector Frederick Cherrell, a revered fingerprint expert. He spoke not with dramatic flair, but with the steady conviction of a man whose science had been tested by decades of cases.
He declared that the fingerprints on the tin opener and the pieces of the shattered mirror found near Oakley's body, objects used to desecrate her remains, matched Cummins. Flowers attempted to weaken his certainty during cross-examination, suggesting the prints were too faint, too unclear for reliable identification. Cherrell disagreed. Such faintness was typical, he said, for fingerprints left on metal surfaces. Enlargement of the photographs created apparent distortions, but the original prints held unmistakable markers. The courtroom felt tighter, smaller as he spoke. Even the jurors shifted uneasily, sensing that the science was not on the defendant's side. Next came the famed pathologist, Sir Bernard Spilsbury. His presence alone carried weight. He testified that Oakley had died from a deep cut to the throat, her life ending in less than 5 minutes from severe blood loss. Her estimated time of death matched the window in which Cummins had been seen alive and free on the streets of London. Then Felix Sampson, Cummins' fellow airman, took the stand. His testimony cut through the last threads of Cummins' crafted alibi. On the night Oakley disappeared, Sampson and Cummins had approached 2 prostitutes outside the Monaco restaurant in Piccadilly Circus. They agreed to meet again once each had completed his business. Sampson returned around 11:30 p.m., waited for 25 minutes, and then left alone for a pub. He did not see Cummins again until 6 a.m. at their quarters in St. John's Wood. When he later asked Cummins what time he had returned the night before, Cummins casually replied, "About 3:30 or 4, adding with unsettling ease, "The woman I was with didn't please me, so I went looking for another." On April 27th, Cummins chose to testify in his own defense. He denied murdering Oakley. He insisted he had been with another woman that night. He admitted he had lied to Detective Greenough earlier about his movements around Monaco restaurant, but claimed fear had driven him to mislead the officer. Greenough, he said, had frightened him by threatening, "We have tied a rope around your neck, and we will hang you with it." He claimed he had been too drunk that evening to recall exact times. "I had no watch," he said, "and of course, in the blackout, one cannot see public clocks." Then came the final act. On April 28th, both prosecution and defense delivered their closing arguments. Justice Asquith addressed the jury for over an hour, reviewing the evidence with meticulous neutrality. As his voice faded, the weight of the case settled over the room like a physical presence. At 4 p.m., the jury withdrew to deliberate. London, a city accustomed to waiting in darkness, held its breath once more. Chapter 12. The Final Judgment. Silence before the gallows. The hour was approaching late afternoon on April 28, 1942, when the jury filed back into the hushed courtroom of the Old Bailey. They had been gone only 35 minutes, an astonishingly short deliberation for a charge as grave as murder. Yet their footsteps told the story before their voices did, slow, deliberate, and avoiding even a passing glance at the man awaiting their verdict. When the clerk asked for their decision, the foreman spoke with a quiet finality that seemed to echo across the chamber. Guilty of murder. No tremor, no hesitation, just the cold weight of certainty. Cummins showed no emotion. His face remained a mask,
neither defiant nor broken, while behind him, his wife collapsed into tears. Moments later, the judge asked if he had any legal reason why the court should not impose the sentence mandated by law. Cummins simply replied, "I'm completely innocent, sir." The law, however, had spoken. Justice Asquith delivered the sentence with the solemn gravity of a man who understood its irreversible weight. Gordon Frederick Cummins, after a fair trial, you have been convicted of murder. The law allows only one sentence. You shall be taken from here to a lawful prison, and from there to a place of execution, where you shall be hanged by the neck until you are dead. May the Lord have mercy on your soul. Cummins was transferred to the condemned cell at Wandsworth Prison, awaiting execution. He displayed little fear, even as he filed an appeal that would be rejected by the Lord Chief Justice in early June 1942. Through it all, he insisted on his innocence, and his wife and family believed him wholeheartedly, visiting him faithfully until his final day. Dawn had barely broken over London on June 25, 1942, when Cummins was prepared for execution. Outside the prison walls, the city remained tense under the threat of air raids, the war showing no signs of easing. Inside, executioner Albert Pierrepoint and his assistants moved with practiced precision. According to contemporary reports, Cummins was offered a glass of brandy to steady his nerves. He drank it calmly. When the moment came, he walked to the gallows without hesitation, flanked by 2 warders. The procedure lasted less than 2 minutes. As his body was lowered from the noose and placed on a stretcher, air raid sirens wailed across London, warning of an incoming German attack. In a strange, almost surreal twist of history, Cummins became the only convicted murderer in British criminal history known to have been executed during an active air raid. His body was buried quietly within the prison grounds. He maintained his innocence to the final breath. The remaining 3 murders attributed to the Blackout Killer were left formally unresolved, though Scotland Yard investigators later stated they were convinced that Cummins had murdered all 4 women, and possibly 2 more during his earlier posting in 1941. Thus ended the story of a man who prowled through wartime darkness, and whose final moments were swallowed by another kind of darkness, the howl of sirens over a city under siege. And now, as we leave behind the dim alleys of wartime London, let the noise of the sirens and the footsteps in the blackout settle into silence once more. The story you have just heard is not only about danger moving through the shadows, it is also about a city learning to survive, about ordinary people holding on to life while the world trembled around them. Even in its darkest nights, London kept its lights within. And perhaps that is why these stories still echo so strongly today. History rarely offers clean endings. It leaves behind loose threads, unanswered questions, and the lingering sense that we are only ever seeing part of a much larger picture. But by revisiting these forgotten moments, by giving names, voices, and dignity to those who endured them, we carry their memory forward. And in doing so, we understand a little more about the world we inhabit now. If you found this journey compelling, if stories like this help you slow down at the end of the day and reflect, feel free to subscribe so you can join us in the next chapter. Your comments, your thoughts, and the questions you bring help shape where we travel next through the corridors of the past. Settle in, breathe,
and let the night close softly around you. Because every corner of history holds another hidden story, waiting quietly, patiently, for someone to listen.